Hello, everybody. Welcome. Hopefully, there are folks that are here. We can't see you because this is webinar style, but we are really happy to be here with all of you. I am Candace Huber. I'm the membership coordinator and social media coordinator for SIBA. And I do a lot of other things, but I'm here in my SIBA capacity today. And I'm really excited to be moderating this panel. I think it's a really, really important subject. And so we are here to talk about supporting trans, non-binary, intersex, and did I get I don't have it pulled up, but all of the people in your community and on your staff. So we are here to discuss that. I'm here with E.R. Anderson, who is the executive director of Kara Circle, and Philomena Holofrone, who is the associate director of the ABFE, which is the American Booksellers for Freedom of Expression. So thank y'all for being here today. And we're going to start with, I'd like y'all to just tell us a little bit about yourselves. And then Philomena is going to give us kind of a broad overview of the current situation. So ER, do you want to start?
Sure. So as Candace said, I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are 50 years old as of November of last year. I am a lifelong bookseller, so I became a bookseller at 15 and have worked in the book industry my entire life. I'm now 43, so truly a lifelong passion for me. Because we have this unique for-profit nonprofit model, we also do a lot of community programming above and beyond books, or using books as a way into doing community programming that's more support group style programming. So we currently have four support groups for trans people across the spectrum of ages. So support groups for trans kids, trans teens, parents of trans kids, and trans adults, all the way up to trans elders who are in their 70s and 80s now. So my work is in supporting our staff. Certainly, I'm trans myself, and also in supporting our community members who are navigating their own employment issues and concerns. So I come at it from a lot of different points of view, and I'm excited to help any of y'all in answering any questions that you may have about how to do this. So thanks for having me.
And as Candace said, I'm Philomena Polifrone. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Associate Director of American Booksellers for Free Expression, ABA's Free Expression Initiative. And my work intersects with this in a number of ways, in that for the first part, I'm working on doing everything I can to defend independent bookstores from targeting and attack based on the content that they carry. And because of the environment, so shall we say, that we live in, the political environment, that often means books by, for, and about trans, intersex, gender nonconforming, and non-binary people. I also help bookstores organize against those issues when they're targeting school libraries and public libraries. And in general, I'm the first responder if a bookstore reaches out to ABA with a concern because they've been harassed or because they're receiving threatening emails or voicemails or social media posts. And I'm doing everything I can to just help people be prepared ahead of time for if that happens and respond if and when it does.
And y'all are both doing amazing work. I'm a big fan of the both of you. And I didn't say this, I don't think in an introducing myself, but I own Tubby and Coos, a traveling bookshop in New Orleans as well. I'm non-binary. It is the only openly queer bookstore in the city that I know of. So also sort of deal with some of these things sometimes. So happy to talk to y'all. I also want to mention that if you have any questions, there is a Q&A function. You can submit them there and we'll get to them at the end. But Philomena, why don't you go ahead and give us sort of an overview of what is happening right now?
Yeah. And just to build off something that Candace said, I'll also mention that I'm a trans woman. This is also very personal for me. So if I'm saying we in reference to it, that's why. And despite that, I'll do my best to be as level-headed and just kind of like solution focused as possible. But I think when talking about this question of how to support trans, intersex, non-binary, and gender non-conforming folks, going forward, I'll just say gender diverse people. Um, there are some perennial issues, and there are some things that are in particular or have a particular shape right now in the political moment starting about 6 months ago, let's say. The perennial issues are that as trans people, there are a lot of things that we have to do that other people might also have to do in certain circumstances, but it's especially disruptive for us because sometimes we have to deal with systems that are hostile to what we're trying to do. That'll vary from state to state, but it also just vary from day to day, office to office. So things like having to change documents, right? To change name and gender marker on certain documents, and then having to navigate what do we do with the old name that was on things that we've published or, old websites and things like that. That stuff requires flexibility. Safety concerns require additional flexibility in certain circumstances. Sometimes those safety concerns can be anticipated in advance, and sometimes they can't. Um, and in general, I think the perennial issue that gender diverse people are looking for in the workplace is just the basic respect and protection that many other folks enjoy without realizing that they do. But in our case, sometimes it's going to require some extra effort to make sure that we have those protections. So that's the perennial stuff, and that essentially all carries over into what I'm about to say next, which is that, for the past 6 months, things have been in particularly difficult for gender diverse people. That's the result of executive orders targeting us. It's the result of, and I would say, a general emboldening of people who think that they have a right to try to remove our culture and cultural products from the public sphere and the private sphere in the case of bookstores, and so many other things. The bans and disinformation targeting books with gender diverse characters and themes has, I can say because I look at this every day, at least Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, for my sanity. Those acts of targeting have really seen a major uptick. There are state bills targeting trans identity and protections, and that means trans books, but it also means trans employment protections. There are travel restrictions that people may not have had to worry about if you want to send staff to an ABA event or Winter Institute. We have some resources available, but that's even if nothing happens, there's just kind of a sense of I don't want to say necessarily fear, but anxiety, let's say, that attends that, and sometimes fear. And families that have gender diverse parents or gender diverse children, uh, those all potentially have other things that folks could have to deal with. So what I hope to do in talking about this is not scare the hell out of people. I sometimes do that without meaning to, but actually to just talk about here. Like, I'm so glad that we have multiple perspectives here in terms of position in the bookselling industry to just talk about how we can improve awareness and collaboration between owners and managers and staff in terms of just making this situation as stable as possible for everyone. And I just want to say right at the top, and I'll try to say it again before the end, that Bink, which is such an important resource. The Bink Foundation provides support in terms of, some financial support, not alone support, mental health support. The first thing that I do if someone reaches out to me with a harassment incident is to tell them that Bink can provide support that ABA, regionals, and employers are not necessarily going to be able to offer. So I'll pause there for now, but I'm happy to elaborate on any of that, Candace and ER, if there's anything that you want to add.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. One thing that I know we had talked about ahead of time was about how owners and managers are all coming from different places, right? We're located in different places physically, we're at different places in our lives. Some of us are trans, non-binary, gender diverse ourselves, some of us aren't. So how can owners and managers sort of approach this from whatever position they're in? Because I know there's just so many different positions we could be coming from.
Um, I think if you're here, you obviously care about your employees and you care about fairness. Even if you don't necessarily know much about trans issues, my guess is you're here because something about the way that trans people are being treated right now rubs you the wrong way. And one of the things that I actually have learned from, the ABA and Winter Institute and SIBA and all of the wonderful things that I've been to is how you treat one employee becomes your de facto employment policy for all employees. So one of the things that I think can be really helpful is to think through what is the most generous and loving and careful way we can treat all of our employees. That actually thinking about the thing, we often joke in our trans support groups, going back to what Philomena was saying, is like, the hardest up until recently, some of the most frustrating parts about being trans is all the paperwork, right? Like there's a huge administrative burden on trans people. Just as there's a huge administrative burden on people who are immigrants, right? Just as there's a huge administrative burden on people who are disabled, just as there's a huge administrative burden on people who are poor. Like we often talk about how expensive it is to be poor in America, right? So I think because you're always filing for additional, government support and things like that. So one of the things that I think I often get frustrated by as a trans person is this idea that like, oh, we're so delicate and special. And if you could, all we care about is that you just call us by our special pronouns. Like I'm very rarely upset by someone accidentally getting my pronouns wrong. I'm upset when people are intentionally dehumanizing me, right? Or intentionally putting up roadblocks that are just like out of cruelty, right? Like I think there's this it's a right wing talking point that trans people want special rights. So I think the more you can think about what policies would make it easiest for my employees to fill out this paperwork, to get their payroll stuff done well. One of the things that we think a lot about is like what paperwork is like legally necessary and what paperwork are we just requiring people to do out of sort of habit. What must we report on versus what are we just complying with because we think, oh yeah, that's what businesses do. So I would really encourage you to look at your local, your city laws, your state laws, and your federal laws around what must be reported on about a given employee and do the least. We don't need to be giving the government all of our employee information right now. Do the absolute least because it does not keep our businesses safe. We have a right to privacy as business owners, and it doesn't keep our employees safe. So that's one thing that I think is just a basic place to start is consider what is the smallest amount that we can require of paperwork that we can require for our employees, because that will keep a lot of employees safe. Do you need to do background checks or do you need to do really rigorous interviews? Do you need to have more like generous reference requests, right? Like there are a lot of ways that you can be more human in your hiring. And I know that takes time, but it also leads to better employee retention. One of the things that I'm very proud of at Karis is that we have a lot of lifers, like myself included, right? Like I came to Karis as a 15-year-old and never left. And the reason for that is not because I can't get a better job that pays more. It's because I feel completely affirmed in my humanity there. And that's true of a lot of our employees. So, Philomena, I don't know if you or Candace want to add anything to that.
And just briefly, one thing that I'll add is that, you don't necessarily have to navigate the state laws alone. If there are organizations that are state specific that you can reach out to, or even if there's a queer community center or an LGBTQ like a business association or something like that. They may have resources, and because every state is different. But I think the thing that is going to cut through everything from, owners to managers to colleagues is just modeling the respect. And I think when people tell you what they need, even if you can't give them exactly the solution that they're asking for, to just believe them and approach it with with that kind of respect and understanding of taking it seriously. So if that's saying like, hey, I just realized that I never updated my okay, Social Security, that's complicated right now. I would not recommend updating that right now if you haven't already. But um, you know, like, hey, I need to go get my real ID updated, right? Because that's a way that I can make sure that I can still fly without having to use a passport. I think taking that seriously and just working with someone and accepting that as like a valid reason to work around someone's schedule. Really basic stuff like that, I think can just be can go a long way.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, that's all I want, I guess, if I think about that a lot too. Like, what would I want as an employer? How would I want to be treated, right, by a boss or whatever? I hate calling myself, I am an owner, but I hate calling myself a boss. I feel like that's like a weird, I don't know. But it's like, okay, so how would I want someone else to treat me? And a lot of the times it's like, I just want things to be easier, right? Like, I don't want to have to go through the hassle of doing a bunch of extra stuff if I don't have to. So I agree with everything that y'all said. I mean, if you can just make the way a little easier for folks. And that sort of translates to community members as well. Coming in, everybody's coming from a different place when they come into your store. So I think just being empathetic and understanding to people. And if, this is what I always tell allies, right, about pronouns. Like if somebody comes in, whether it's a staff member or it's a community member or it's a friend or a family member or whoever, and you do accidentally get pronouns wrong, just don't make a huge deal out of it, because that makes us feel worse, or it makes me feel worse. At least when somebody is just making this huge, oh, I'm so sorry. This is, so you can just say, oh, change it. You're recognizing, right, that you got it wrong. You change it, you move on, and it's okay. And most people are pretty understanding about that, but just treat people like people, right? And make sure that, you're being empathetic towards everybody and trying to make things as easy as possible for everybody, I think is always a good way to go. Do y'all have anything to add about like community stuff too?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's always really important for me to remember and center is we're booksellers. Hopefully, we're all creative people, and we're people who love books as portals to other worlds, and that's why we got into this business. I know for many of us, we spend more time looking at spreadsheets than we do reading books. But if that love is still animating in you, um, I think it's that love, at least for me, is how I sort of train myself to believe in the evidence of things not seen, right? Like that I don't have to see something with my own eyes to believe it when someone tells me it's their story or it's their truth, right? And so it is confounding to me when booksellers demand suddenly, booksellers who love orcs and fantasy and all this stuff suddenly demand on some kind of empirical visual evidence of who someone is, either racially or about their invisible disability or about their gender and their transness. It's like, why is that the litmus test, right? Like, why must a random stranger be able to tell with their own eyes what someone else's internal truth is? Like, we're all too smart for that. So I would encourage you, when you feel that, we all feel that, like, I feel that impulse sometimes. I do. Someone tells me something about themselves and I'm like, really? Okay. Like, I'm not above it. But what I remember is the world is so much more vast and complicated than I can ever imagine. And isn't that a beautiful thing? And isn't that why we are in this business? And isn't that what we want for our children and for the world, is for it to be much more complicated than we could ever imagine on our own. And that's why we read books, and that's why we put books in other people's hands. And so when someone tells you, hey, I use they, them pronouns, or I use its pronouns, you might think that sounds bonkers. So what? It's not your business. It's not your life. Like, let them live and call them by what they want to be called, you know? And defend their right to do it to other employees, to customers, whatever. It's not that deep. It's not that hard.
Yeah, and I just want to underline and repeat the point that is coming out so much in what both of you are saying, which is that if you're creating an empathetic system for one group, there is going to have positive knock-on effects for other folks, right? Everyone benefits from the right to privacy. Everyone, especially right now, as we've seen how formerly very boring paperwork can actually be weaponized, right? I think minimizing the amount of information that you need to keep on people while making sure that you're covering yourself and complying with what you have to comply with, of course, right? But going back to I think the first point that was made, just sticking to the minimum, right? And that's true in terms of the amount of personal information you need to know about a colleague or employee, right? Like, of course, yeah, you want to know them, but you don't have to ask invasive questions that just to satisfy your own curiosity. I think that's sort of the personal corollary of not needing of kind of the legal right to privacy. They kind of go together in a way, and they benefit everyone.
Agreed. And I think this also dovetails into another question that we wanted to cover, which is advocating, right? So the what kinds of questions can owners and managers ask to help advocate for staff and community? Because I also do think, like, this point's being made a lot too, where, you know, none of us are free till all of us are free, right? Like, all of our struggles are interrelated. So, you know, everything that goes for these groups that we're talking about can also go for your BIPOC employees and your disabled employees and just so many immigrants, or like so many different groups, right, have very similar struggles. So what can owners and managers do to help advocate, right? What questions can they ask to help advocate for their gender diverse staff?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can start with it. These are not all going to be questions that you're asking of staff, right? So I think I think that sometimes the intention to be helpful, if it ends up, creating like a little research project for someone who already has a full-time job, like that's not necessarily going to be the best way to help someone. But what you can do is when you're picking an insurance policy, right, to ask questions about coverage for HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy, for gender affirming care, right? And even if you don't necessarily have an insurance plan that is covering all of those things to the extent that you want, asking that question, and if enough people are constantly asking that question, eventually that trickles its way to someone who knows that would make them more competitive versus other insurance plans. And I would encourage, just thinking specifically about insurance plans, mental health coverage, especially right now for gender diverse folks, is really, really, really important. And that's I think part of one of the questions that you can ask that is going to benefit every one of your employees.
Yeah. There are a ton of little like tips and tricks that I can suggest. Like, we have a emergency contact form. On that emergency contact form, we say, like say it's a younger employee that still lives with their parents. We'll be like, when we call your mom's your emergency contact, what name do you want us to use when we tell your mother that you are at this hospital, right? But more than that, what hospital do you want us to take you to? Because with all of these religious freedom executive orders and religious freedom acts being passed in certain states, there are hospitals that many trans and gender nonconforming people don't want to go to. Frankly, many women don't want to go to if they are having any kind of reproductive health issue, right? Because Catholic hospitals and Baptist hospitals, many of them have now employees who will refuse to provide service to people who are, potentially going to need an abortion, or trans people in general across the board, or queer people in general across the board, right? We're living in an age where someone's religious freedom trumps everything else. And that's really dangerous in public service and public accommodations, right? Historically, that's not been the case under law. And now we're seeing that that is a priority of this administration. So we ask those questions. And, a 20-year-old employee may never have thought about that. Most of them haven't, right? But I do think it's something that you can think about, and you can look at, okay, well, what hospitals in my area seem the safest. You could make a recommendation as a just sort of general, like, well, this seems to be the most secular hospital, right? Like, I don't know. Like, you should do your own research, but this is what I know about this. My request always to cisgender allies and straight allies is, I would love for you to be as aware of the laws that are being passed and up for debate as I am, because one of the very draining things is that I'm spending all of this time getting an internet legal degree, trying to stay up to date on all of these laws that are affecting my personhood. And most of my friends are like, oh yeah, it's hard out there, huh? Like, in this very vague general way. And I'm like, do you know the nuances of what's hard? Like, do you have any idea of the specifics of all of these different angles? And I would encourage you, I think that's the difference between sort of a bland allyship that's like flag waving, and a very specific earned allyship that's like, oh, I see that, at this moment, the Supreme Court is debating whether or not parents should be allowed to object to LGBTQ books being read in elementary schools. And I understand that the effect of that will be that if those parents win, which it looks like they will, that there will be quiet censorship that will happen, and basically LGBTQ books will no longer be read in schools because it will be too hard for teachers to read those books. And what that will mean is that queer and trans children will not see themselves represented, and cisgender and straight children will not see queer and trans kids represented. And so they will become more and more strange, and it will increase violence against kids, right? So I want people to know that, and I want them to know it without me having to tell them. So I would encourage you, to research stuff and read the newspaper in your local area, as if you have one still, or read the AP website, which is still relatively okay. AP News is still relatively okay, and do your due diligence about like what's affecting us right now, because it does matter, and other groups as well, right? I think we all have a duty to each other around these things right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also want to add that for trans folks who are on the call, I think when you're advocating for yourself, when you're talking to someone in an ownership position or management position, I think that it used to be kind of trendy to say, like, it's not my job to educate you. And that's true, right? It's not. But I also just want to urge some pragmatism here. I think what ER is saying is great, and I really also want everyone to do that work. And trans folks need help and allyship in the meantime too. And so I think sometimes being prepared with kind of like, hey, here's the context that you might need to understand why I need to ask to come in late this day because this is the only DMV appointment I could get before the Real ID deadline. You know what I mean? Like, I think just kind of being willing to explain some of the context while also, as gently as you have to, like, encouraging people like, hey, if you want to subscribe to the, North Carolina ACLU on social media, I know you use social media, like that could be a good way to learn more about this if you're interested, or follow this, or here's, if you want to learn more about it, here's some places where I learn about it. Because we're not born knowing the laws that make our lives better or worse, unfortunately. So I do think that there's a lot of learning that needs to happen, and there's only so much of it that you can take on. But I think being kind of patient with people, I think, is going to help you get what you need more often than not.
I agree with that, and I appreciate that. And I also would say, for owners and managers who are making choices around like health insurance policies, I know there are a lot of trans employees who get really pissed when trans healthcare is not covered in their health insurance policies. But I am also the person at my organization that has to choose the health insurance policies. And I know how impossible and expensive it is. And I know that like almost none of them in Georgia, have any good coverage. And many of us are in states, particularly within SIBA, that do not have trans healthcare coverage. But I think it's really helpful if you can be transparent with your employees, because I think sometimes you might be scared, like, oh, I don't want to tell you, like, this is how much it costs, or this is why we're not doing it, or I don't want to disappoint you, or I don't want to say something wrong. But I actually think if you can say really clearly, like, hey guys, this is our budget. This is how much this costs. This is why we're making this decision. And I want you to see the things that I'm choosing between, so that you know that I'm not willfully disregarding you and your needs as a trans person. I'm looking at this larger picture of all of our employees. And maybe we have an employee who's had cancer. Maybe we have an employee who's chronically ill in these other ways. Like, we're balancing a lot of stuff. And I do think that transparency is helpful, because then people will be like, yeah, a lot of people have a lot of stuff going on. Like, it's hard out here, And I think people can hear that, because again, we are not special snowflakes. And so yeah, it is hard to have health insurance and figure it out. And so that kind of transparency really does help sort of settle people down too.
Yeah, and I think this also goes into, which Philomena was kind of touching on a minute ago, with advocating for yourself. But I think one thing with employees who are in these situations that I hear a lot is that they don't really know how to talk to their owners or managers in a way that will help them understand. So maybe we can give some advice to the staff member who is trying to, what is the best way to ask for things from an owner or a manager if you're in a situation where, I know that can be intimidating and hard for a staff member to be personal in that way and to ask an owner or manager for that, especially if the owner or manager isn't super receptive. Not everyone is. Some people are, some people aren't. So what advice can we give to these staff members who are trying to, ask things of their owners and managers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that, being the main thing that I said about giving people the information they need to understand where you're coming from, I've already said to some extent, but I think also just trying to do whatever you can to set your expectations according to what's possible in the moment, and to advocate from that position while knowing that it's not going to be the last thing that you advocate for. I think that with so much advocacy, whether it's self-advocacy or advocacy for others, it's really easy to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And when it's a matter of having what you need, and when it's a matter of survival and safety, I think that you need to make hard compromises a lot. That said, don't compromise in advance, right? I think having the courage to ask for what you need is sometimes going to succeed when you don't expect it to. So I think the assumptions can go both ways here, right? And I think, and even if someone has maybe gotten something wrong in the past, that doesn't necessarily mean they don't want to help. And if you don't advocate for yourself, then it becomes harder to then um, have a complaint in terms of advocating for change. Because I think sometimes if you don't advocate, and this is something I learned from therapy, right? Like, if you don't advocate early, then I think it builds up and then it comes out kind of hot. So I think, try to get to it before it gets to that point.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I would just say, I always believe that requests for change are best articulated in the values of the institution that you're trying to change. So if you work in a bookstore that really values free speech, couch your requests in a version of your free expression, right? Your right to wear your, nails and hair long as a person that is in the process of transitioning towards a more feminine gender expression.
I think he froze. Did
And you've maybe gotten some push. Did I freeze? Uh-oh. Am I back or no?
You're
No?
back. You're back now.
Okay. Just basically, like, if you're transitioning towards a more feminine gender expression and that maybe is like bumping up against some dress code stuff, like, well, like, is this our value? And here's how I'm choosing to interpret that value. That's something I've really valued about this workplace. Can we talk about it? Like, always just kind of sharing what you value about your job instead of being like, fuck you, boss man. But like, what's the thing that keeps you wanting to work there, right? Because I think sometimes managers and owners can feel like, God, like, none of us is getting rich here. This is not an easy job. I'm doing the best I can. And now you're trying to make trouble for me too. Like, come on, So I think offering what you do value about the place as you're asking for accommodations and change and shifts with people who maybe are trying to catch up is a good way to get what you need.
Yeah, and in terms of asking for support in terms of customer interactions, because, especially depending on where you are, I think that sometimes that can be one of the biggest liabilities in terms of safety and well-being. And even if it's not, like anyone can come in wherever you are, and you can suddenly find yourself having a bad and even scary interaction. And so I think in advocating for that, I think it's possible you don't need to have a solution. You don't need to expect the person that you're talking to have a solution right away. I think it's okay to say, hey, here's something that either I'm concerned about because of the climate that we're in, or something that happened. Could we just find a time to brainstorm some ways to make things safer for everybody if there are scary interactions like that? Um, because, there are a lot of like really simple things that you can suggest, like having a kind of code word for backup if it's a store with like multiple people on the floor at a given time, or even just practicing some language or having protocols for language to use if you need to ask someone to leave, or things like that. Kind of going through that stuff ahead of time whenever possible can kind of help you get out ahead of situations where you might otherwise feel one step behind and feel like you don't know what to do.
And again, that's like a safety plan that is good for one is a safety plan that is good for all, because de-escalation, good for one, good for all. I think those are, SIBA and the ABA have great resources on these things. And I think we really need to be practicing these with our teams. We go over this all the time at Caris because we host people who are controversial in the mainstream. And, it helps our employees feel empowered and to remind them, like, if something feels wrong to you, you have a right to shut it down. Like, we're not going to fire you because you like accidentally like overreacted to something that felt violent. Or if someone walks in with a gun strapped to their hip, because we live in a, completely outlaw state where you can just do that and you don't feel comfortable, like, you can come ask us to ask that person to leave and we will, right? Like, that's the precedent that we've set. But I think articulating your team's safety values and culture in your store, like what you're willing to put up with and what you're not, and what you as an owner or manager are willing to do or not do, and what your relationship to calling the police or whoever, like all of that stuff, I think is really important. Because if your employees know what the line is, they'll be more empowered to act sooner before something gets bad, and you can kind of trust them more with that power.
Mhm. Yeah, and another thing, we just recently had a discussion in a different capacity about safety in a couple of different events that I was in. And one thing that a couple of things that people brought up that I thought were really good is if you have more than one employee. Now, I know this is different. Some of us are single owners, some of us have employees, some of us, so I know every situation is different, but if you can have more than one person working at a time, that is good for safety as well, because there's buddies, they can call for backup if they need it. If one person is working the shop at a time, I think having them feel empowered, like ER was saying, is super, super important, because that person needs to know, is there a neighbor's house they can go to, or whatever, or a neighbor's store that they can go to, that you've talked to, that you're in community with, that if they feel very unsafe, they can go next door or whatever, right? So I think that's also that community aspect, I think, is really where we all are. We're in our communities, we know our communities. So having those relationships and letting your staff know, like, okay, you can go to this place next door if you feel very unsafe, and then they can help you navigate if you're by yourself. I thought that was some good advice as well.
When we were at our brokest at Karis, we just had retiree volunteers who would come and sit and read the paper when we couldn't afford to pay more than one person to be there, especially at night. And literally, they were like, they just chilled. They just sat in the corner, and these people were not gonna like be fighting anybody that were trying to attack us. But it was another human being in the room where if I needed to go to the bathroom, or if I needed someone to, if somebody in distress came into the space, I could be like, "Hey, Nancy, can you go?" We had code words. We had various things like, "Hey, I think we had that watermelon cut up. Could you go check on that?" Like, and it's a great thing because people in your communities do want to feel important, but they might not be like ready for the full safety team. But asking, a retired 75-year-old Quaker lady to come sit and read the paper might make her feel really valuable, and those can form really warm long-term relationships in your community. And that's something that we've done at Karis for a long time, and it's been lovely, and it has really helped. So I definitely understand people feeling like, oh, I can't afford to have two people, but think about volunteers in that way, who you don't have to train to do anything but sit there.
That's
I
a
think,
great idea.
yeah, like vibing in the corner of the bookstore is an incredible volunteer gig.
I
That
agree.
sounds
I think
great.
lots of people want to vibe in the corner. Just like, here, you can read, give them an arc. Like, you can pick an arc and read a book and sit here in the corner. I mean, that's an amazing volunteer job.
Give them a 10% discount. That's it.
Exactly. And this sort of safety conversation also goes along with online safety, which we wanted to touch a little bit on, because these days it's some people are more comfortable with sort of being online than others. And so I have that at my store. We are very online. I am a very much a millennial and I live on the internet, and the store lives on the internet. And so one thing that I have to think about a lot with my folks is, do they want to be on the internet, right? So when we post staff recs on the website or on social media, do these people want their pictures out there? Do they want their names out there even? Do we just want to say, here's a staff rec? Or do we want to say this person and here's their picture and here's their... So I think there's a lot that goes into thinking about how your store presents things online as well. So what advice do y'all have for sort of that online safety aspect, or what questions can we be asking about online stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of online stuff, but one thing that I try to just say as often as I can is when you're advertising an event, think about how and where you're putting it out there in terms of what language you're using to describe the event. Because there are bad actors who are just gonna have like a Google alert for events that they don't like. And that's where we've been able to see people like really easily do serial bomb threats and stuff. So I'm not saying don't advertise if you're doing a drag story hour, right? Of course not. But I do think that if it's something where you're particularly worried about heat that is going to come from outside the community, I think that maybe that's something that it makes the most sense to advertise in your newsletter as opposed to on your Facebook account. I think Facebook has been the place where I have seen the most social media harassment. I think because for the most part, a lot of folks have left X. Um, but Facebook, I don't know exactly what it is. I think it might be the way that you can share posts specifically to private Facebook groups or, something else that just really kind of lets it get out of control. So if you're thinking that an event is probably okay to advertise on social media, but you're still a little concerned about it, I might advise you to just not put it on Facebook, but still put it on Instagram or something like that. That said, Instagram's not free of harassment by any means. I also think just saving everything that happens, especially if it is a threat or feels threatening, right? I think having a record of it is really important. But, if let's say that you're the person who does social media for the store, takes the lead on it, is gender diverse, and you are um, worried and you start to get some kind of harassment, or if you're doing an event that you're worried is going to get harassment, check in with them to say, like, hey, this thing could lead to some online harassment. How do you feel okay continuing to do this work, or do you want me to take it over? Do you want us to see if we can find someone else to take it over? Same thing goes if you're getting harassing emails and phone calls. I do think that if you're getting harassing phone calls and you have the presence of mind to take note of the phone number, do so. If any of these things happen, you can get in contact with me. It's abfe at bookweb.org. We do so much in terms of not just like case by case responding to people, but also just keeping a record of all these things to look for patterns and communicate with our allies who are dealing with it.
I think that's all really great advice. I want to second that Facebook and Twitter / X. We don't put vulnerable things on there anymore because we have gotten the worst stuff from there. Instagram, for whatever reason, it's easy to block people on Instagram. It's much easier to shut stuff down. And we don't engage, like, don't ever engage. Like, we don't engage. We silo stuff. We really have we've had a newsletter for forever, for 20 years. We've really re-engaged with that content, and also with Discords and with Signal chats. We have really focused on building more in-person networks of things, more paper flyers. We really think now is the time to get back to that. Not everything needs to be on the internet. But also we have to figure out what is that. We've always really tried to figure out what is the line between there being a low barrier to entry to new people. Because there's so many people who need community right now, need to find community and don't have the skills to do that. So how do we help those people figure it out, right? Especially younger people who are born on the internet. How do we get them into our spaces so that we can give them analog experiences of community and they can build those skills to then find other spaces? How do we balance that with safety? It's tricky, and we argue on a weekly basis about which events need which kinds of strategies. We often will just tailor the messaging to the platform. So we might have the same event, but use different words to describe it on Facebook if we're going to put it on Facebook. And we hope that the community that we're inviting or targeting in a positive way will hear the positive dog whistle and feel invited, right? Like we're trying to figure out, okay, like how can we craft this message to get through to the people that need it and not get through to the haters. And we do have a vast hater file. So we keep all that stuff. It's all siloed. And yeah, we keep it as evidence, and it's depressing, but we have it.
Yeah. And there are a couple questions, so I definitely want to get to those. But one more question before we get to everyone else's questions, which is, and ER touched on this a little bit earlier about being sort of a surface level ally who just flies a flag versus being an ally who is more involved. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit about flying the queer flag, right? Like, what does that actually mean to community members when you fly that flag outside of your store? And when should you or shouldn't you fly it?
Yeah, this was a question that I wanted to talk about. So I'll start, and then Philomena, I would love your input. I think that you are making a commitment when you put up a flag. In the same way that if you are a white person and during 2020 you put up a sign that said Black Lives Matter, you're putting up an invitation. And that invitation says that I understand that anybody who holds these identities is vulnerable in this moment, and I value you and I see you and I want you to know that I've thought about my commitment to your community, and I'm inviting you into this space, and you will find things in this space that value your identity, and you will find things in this space that will make you feel more safe and seen and whole. And anyone you encounter in this space is going to make you feel better about yourself, not worse. All those things, right? And in 2020, I often heard, a lot of Black customers going into white-owned stores that have Black Lives Matter signs saying, "Man, y'all were not ready to receive Black customers. You have not done your work, and you were not like, you don't just get to slap a sign up." And the same is true for queer and trans people, right? Of all races and identities. It's like, what that means is it is a kind of covenant, right? It is saying we are committed to making sure that you have a good experience in this space. And now, of course, customers can have bad experiences for all kind of reasons. They can be divas and Karen. There's plenty of trans Karens, right? Like, I'm not saying that, right? Like, you could have a shitty customer experience situation with a bad customer, but on the basis of their queerness or their transness, they should not have a bad experience in your space. And so I want you to think really carefully about the promises that you are implying if you hang a queer or trans flag. And my honest advice is, if you're not ready to make those commitments, like, that doesn't make you a bad person, but it means don't hang it until you're ready, right? Don't put those, don't like virtue signal. Don't say that you have a virtue that you're not yet ready to really live out in your day-to-day values until you're ready. And that doesn't mean that you might not be ready next year, but it means that it is really, really dangerous and disingenuous to invite people into a space that is not ready to receive them and can cause more harm than good.
And I think I would add, those are all great points. And I think starting to talk to you about this ER has really kept me thinking about it. And it's really interesting to just observe how that plays out in different spaces. But I think also, if you have queer and trans staff and you're in an area that has a lot of harassment or potential for harassment of queer and trans people, and gender diverse people of all kinds, right? Like, putting a flag out might be performative allyship that could bring a kind of attention to the store that your staff doesn't necessarily want. So the suggestion here is just talk to your team about it, right? To say, like, hey, I want you to know that you're supported here, and I want the community to be welcome here. And also, we're in a very particular moment, and I want to check in with you about if this feels safe to you, and we can, keep talking about it as it develops. I wish it weren't the case, but this is the reality we live in, and we have to meet this moment.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. I will say that I am a queer-owned store. I don't fly a flag outside. I put them inside. So there's also that option too, because it's like, I don't know what kinds of people are going to come in here. So, I mean, the people who are coming to my store know what it is, right? Like, I'm very vocal about what the store is. I don't think that anybody doesn't know if you follow my store in any way. So, people know what it is. They come in, they sort of expect to see things, right? But I don't have to signal to everybody on the street who may or may not know what my store is, what it is, right? And that's for my own personal safety reasons. I just decided I didn't want to do that anymore. So, like Yara said, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person if you don't, or if your staff says, I don't feel safe doing that right now. So I think those are all really good suggestions. And I do want to get to it. We have like 4 questions in here. Some of them are pretty easy questions and some of them are not. So the first one is, what recommendations do you have for encouraging staff to use the correct pronouns for their fellow staff, for authors, for community members, and then for correcting them when they get pronouns wrong?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, well, one thing I would say is that getting in the habit of inviting people to share pronouns, regardless of whether you think they're trans, is very important because, gender diverse people look all kinds of ways. Sometimes, but also I would say inviting people to share, but not demanding it. I think sometimes that can be another situation. Like there were certain moments for me where I was really dreading that question because I was figuring it out, right? And I think a lot of people have that experience on their way somewhere, or even just exploring. So, I think that it's good to invite people. So the part one of the answer to this question is getting in the habit of just getting that information out there in a way that is welcoming without being demanding, right? I think in terms of correcting people, I think just kind of thinking about tone and kind of how you approach it, to say like, if someone gets my pronouns wrong and Candace is saying like, oh, it's she, her actually. Like, right. I mean, first of all, that could, if I'm a staff member and I'm working Tubby and Coos, I think that I would hope that Candace and I would have a conversation about that ahead of time of like, hey, if this happens, and this is tricky because not everyone will feel great about this conversation, but if there's a way to sort of have a conversation that is comfortable for everyone, that is saying like, hey, if this happens, what do you prefer? Do you just like to let it ride? Do you like when someone else corrects it? Do you like to correct it yourself? Because literally everyone I know who deals with this has a subtly different answer to that question. And I know that's tiring, right? But that's work that you can do, I think, to sort of figure that out. In terms of correcting staff, I think just being like gentle but insistent, I would say, is the vibe that I would hope for.
I think all of that's great. The one thing I'll just say that was very helpful for us is that we got a bunch of magnetic staff pens that are, like nameplates, but instead of having people's names, it just says Karis Bookseller and then a bunch of different pronoun configurations. So, and there's no, and then one without any pronouns on it. Right. And so they're all the same color. They're all purple, but it'll, because those are our colors, but it'll be like she, her, she, they, them, he, him, whatever. And so it is a subtle way to indicate to people. I'm not saying that people are always slick, like you would be wearing a they, them pen and they'll be like, this lady right here, right? Like people are still a mess, but it is a way to just be like, this is our employee, and all, because we don't have a dress code. And also like, this is their pronouns. It's also a way for our employees to not feel like they have to declare to us shifting. So say somebody was she, her, and then they're using the she, they a little bit more. And then we see they're using the they, them. That's maybe an invitation for us to be like, hey, I see you're using the they, them pen a little bit more. Do you want us to change your staff write-up online? Right? Like that's a thing we can do as a manager to just ask, because maybe they don't want to make a big deal out of it, but like it's an invitation for us. So it's another way to do that, because like Philomena is saying, like I used to dread that, like, oh, let's all go around and say our pronouns, because I was like, I don't know, like I don't want to do this right now. And I do also think saying, like, having other people be like, no, actually it's he, him now, right? Because I grew up at Karis, so I used she, her, they, them, and he, him before, getting here. So it is messy. People are messy. We can do it.
I've been waiting for the chance to make this public service announcement. If she, they, she, he, they, he, if you don't know what to do with those pronouns, that is something you can Google. And it's also something that might mean different things to other people, but you don't have to make a big deal out of it. I think you can ask the question in a chill way one time. And that doesn't have to be the first interaction that you have with someone. So that's it's whenever you can Google
100%. And there's a
or
couple
Bing, whatever.
thing, right? Use anything. There's a couple more questions that we can get through pretty quickly, I think, if y'all are willing to take another minute or two, because I know we're like up against time. But somebody asked for book recommendations for staff or customers or parents who need information on helping to teach about other genders. So are there any books that have non-binary or transgender characters that the focus isn't on their gender, but they're part of the story, right? That might help people if y'all have book recommendations. We always love those.
I mean, Karis has many lists on our website, so I'll drop our lists. But that is our specialty. So
Yep.
KarisBooksandMore.com, and then we have multiple trans lists. Fiction, nonfiction, books for little kids, books for teens, book for adults, books for coming out, all the things.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at some of the content that came out around the trans rights readathon, like there were so many great resources that came out. The one that ABFI put out this year was focused on trans history. And I think that could be a really interesting thing for someone to learn who is trying to understand the liberation struggle and what it means and where it came from. Some of that is pretty inside baseball, but I think a lot of it is also just stuff that there are more and more accessible versions of that coming out.
I also think there's so much stuff all the time now in different genres that figuring out what's the genre that someone likes to read. So there's a book that's coming out today, or came out yesterday by Milo, somebody that's like a World War II trans book. And I was like, finally, a book for all the grandpas that love World War II literature. Like, this is the trans book for them, right? Like, there's finally enough trans literature that we're in all of these different genres, so we can kind of get niche. And then of course there's some 101 books that are just like, here's what this means, like here's a literal glossary, right? And there are those books that are valuable too. But I think as trans literature expands and grows beyond its infancy, there's such a beautiful plethora of stuff. And so you can find like, all right, well, what do you already like to read? Let me give you these books by trans authors. And I would suggest following that hashtag, trans rights readathon that Philomena's talking about, because you'll just find so much stuff on Instagram or TikTok.
Completely agree. And one more quick question, and I will let y'all know we're not going to be able to get to all of the questions that are in here, but what I can do is I can send them to ER and Philomena. We have an email chain, and we can try to answer some of these so that in the recap that goes out about this event, we can try to get some of these other questions answered. Y'all have really good questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. But another quick one is there a good email newsletter you can recommend for small businesses to stay informed about this changing landscape for gender diverse people?
I would recommend Aaron in the Morning. I don't know if you agree with that, Philomena, but I think that's super accessible. Aaron Reed I'll drop that in the chat. Aaron Reed is a incredible journalist, and she is the only Substack that I pay for because she's so smart and doing a lot of work to follow all of the trans legislation that's happening in the United States and some internationally. So if you just want like a quick snippet every day of like, here's what's happening today, it's pretty great. And it's very easy to understand. So that's my vote.
If you want to follow things that are going on in your state, it varies a little state to state, but if you follow not just the ACLU, but your state ACLU chapter, They're often going to be great sources of information on bills that are pending. Um, AbbVie pretty much puts out information about how it impacts books, but as well as many other things that impact books and free expression. But if that's the angle that you want, definitely go to bookweb.org/advocacy and you can sign up for our newsletters there. I think, following like the Transgender Law Center and other kind of like and like Lambda Legal and things like that, I think that can be a really good way to get some of that information. And if you want to go real deep into the like legal nerd stuff, I just started listening to Strict Scrutiny, and that is fun and interesting.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to ER and Philomena for having this conversation today. We really hope that y'all learned some things and got some stuff out of this. And I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but we will try to answer them for you in our follow-up. So we will write a little follow-up thing that will go out. Hopefully the regionals will be able to send it out in all the newsletters. And so keep a lookout for that if your question didn't get answered. And thank you all for coming today. And again, ER and Philomena, y'all are my heroes. So thank y'all so much for doing this with me today, and have a great day to everyone.
Thanks so much for having us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks to
Thank you
SIBA
so
for
much.
organizing.
Good to
Bye,
see
y'all.
you.